Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 6 of Groove, the No Treble podcast, which you can always find at notreble.com. My name is Mitch Joel, and let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Michael Manring, and I play bass.
Man, do you ever. I have a confession to make to you, Michael, and I waited for this moment to tell you. There would be no Groove, the No Treble podcast were it not for you.
Really?
It's true. I had stepped out of the sort of playing world of bass, but always a fan of the music and all that. And I came across you doing a version of The Enormous Room on this YouTube clip where you're playing in someone's house. And that video is probably 7 years old and has had over 600,000 views. But when I watched that video and I saw the way you approached the instrument, I thought, I don't know if the story's ever been told the way I want to tell or the way I want you to tell the story of being a musician. A lot of the stuff I see is always about the gear and the techniques and what you're and I actually in just watching that one video, I thought, wow, like I don't know if the real sort of oral history of why people are bass players has ever really been told. And it was really inspirational for me.
Oh, thank you so much.
So this is all your fault. and that's how we begin. The thing that really struck me and the sort of question I really had, even when I saw it, so long ago, was that it's clear that the instrument really speaks to you. And I was curious in the depth of which you spend time with the instrument. Why? Why do you think this is the instrument that speaks to you, considering your background and your history?
That is kind of the big question, I guess. And I suppose some of your listeners will have heard a lot of this before, so I apologize for that. It's something that I've thought a lot about myself. People have asked me various times through my life, why the bass? Especially when I was a kid, I started to get pretty good, and everybody said, you should switch over to guitar and get all the girls and all the money and all that instead of staying down here with the bottom feeders. But I just never could really do that. I love hearing guitar played well, and I've tried playing it, and I'm horrible at it. I totally suck at guitar. I have friends who are amateur guitar players who blow me away at guitar. So I don't know if there's some kind of mental block against it or something. And then later, this kind of came up for me because when I was with Windham Hill Records, I did some solo piano pieces for them. And those ended up being on records that were really, really popular. So I think I probably made more money playing solo piano than playing solo bass. But I can't really imagine doing that either. For me, bass is really I don't know, as some people say, sort of the heart chakra. It's so deep for me and so so integral to the whole picture for me. I think, in kind of going through this in my own mind, trying to figure out why, what it is that does it for me, I think a lot of it is that it's the instrument of this time and place. I mean, it's really about who we are and what we're doing. It's an instrument that was invented not far from where I live, not long before I was born. It's an instrument that integrates some old technology with some new technology in the sense that it's related to the guitar, it's related to the upright bass, but it's an instrument that was designed always to be electric and acoustic. So an acoustic tone production and then electronic amplification, adaptation of that sound. That was always part of its identity, this kind of marriage of acoustic and electric, which is to say a marriage of old and new, I guess. And so I think it's all these things I think that's just something that's critical to me, the sense that it's just part of this bizarre paradigm we live in civilization as it is now. The instrument doesn't come with a lot of necessary history in the same way that, say, a violin does. If you pick up the violin, if you're serious about it, you have to acknowledge this amazingly rich history it has. Whereas the bass, it's a much more brief history. And so the story is kind of less written about it. And that's important to me too, because again, this world we live in is so rich and complex, and we're facing so many possibilities and challenges that haven't been faced before. That for me to try to make some kind of music that makes sense in this situation, it's really helpful for me to have a tool that's kind of part of that whole process. And, it was an instrument that was made to be mass-produced. It was not conceived of as a fine work of art. It was really conceived of in this whole sort of set of ideas that exists at this time and place. It's kind of a native voice for me. So I think in the big picture, that's what's kept me fascinated about it all these years.
So, it's fascinating because clearly when you speak like that, you spent time really thinking about it, not just in the sphere of what it means in the context of a band or a piece of music, but in the greater zeitgeist, if you will, of the world. But take it down, if you can, into the more sort of personal realm. So knowing all that, you find this thing, you start playing with it, and it seems to me that a lot of people played with it and then, okay, I can do a lot with this. But then you sort of looked at it, and it's almost like when you're being taught to drive. They always tell you, like, don't look at the front of the hood, like look at the whole landscape. Like you want to have diffused vision so you can actually see when a car is coming. And it does feel to me that you're one of the few players who sort of really looked at it with that sort of lateral vision versus just looking at the tip of the hood and going, this is what it can do. Were there markers in your experience of playing the instrument where you saw there was so much more musicality in it?
I think that part of it just kind of happened. I always thought of the instrument that way. And the notion of it being an especially sort of conventional instrument has always been a little foreign to me. I appreciate that, and I have no real resistance to the conventional approach to it, but I can't stop there. It's just, I love all the conventional approaches, and those are awesome, and I love working on those myself. But there's just something, I don't know where it came from, just some kind of feeling that it's just a fantastic paintbrush, a wonderful tool for really creating all kinds of music.
And that, when you think about it in that construct, do you think about it beyond 4 strings, 5? You do. You think about it obviously in terms of the tuning, the types of tools that you're using, the sound effects. To you, those aren't just things you add on. It's part of the sound.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I often tell people the way I think about the pedals, the effects, is just like the pedals on a piano. They're part of the instrument. They can be overused. You have to practice to try to use them effectively, but used well, they really help to enhance the music. So yeah, all these things are just part of the instrument, part of the capability of the instrument.
But is the massive leap that you take with it the fact that you see music instead of bass? Would that be a fair sort of statement about how you approach things?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure I can answer that. It's a really good question. I'll give it some thought, but both are true. I definitely am thinking in terms of music, but as I was talking about earlier, the instrument itself is really important to me. I've always wanted to be a composer for as long as I can remember. I mean, I've always composed music, and I've composed all kinds of different music. But the format that most fascinates me is solo bass, composing just for the bass. And I'm happy as a composer. I'm happy just composing for the bass. It's always nice to compose for other instruments. I've even, composed for orchestra, but I'd rather compose for solo bass. Something about the instrument itself just really speaks to me.
So, but when you say composing for solo bass, again, people who are more layman to the instrument think solo bass. Oh, that's when you move higher up on the neck and play faster in a more in a more finger moving Eddie Van Halen type of way. And it's a fair enough sort of thing, right? You don't. That's not what you mean, though.
Yeah, I mean, playing the bass, specifically in this context, I mean playing the bass unaccompanied.
It's such a fascinating world to watch. Take me also a little bit back and talk a little bit about the physicality of it. So you're obviously experimenting with tuning and you're playing for a long enough time that when you actually get into a place where you have an instrument that you can literally shift tunes and all this tuning and all this sort of magical things that you do, it is a bit weird. I remember when I first saw you play like that, I thought I wasn't sure almost at the beginning, right? It's sort of this weird, like, what's going on here? Did he forget that he didn't tune there? Or what? And then as you get past bar one, you realize, whoa, that's the song, that is the music. There must have been, I mean, there had to have been something where you thought, I can do this in between, as it's happening, as a part of the composition. Was it a written exercise? Was it a practice thing? Was it is it a Reese's peanut butter cup? The chocolate just stuns into peanut butter and you realize it tastes great. I mean, you had to have moments like that because people were playing with that, but I don't think they were really doing it in the construct of composition almost.
Yeah, I think for me it's a little hard to be objective and to have perspective on it because it's just been this passion that I've followed through. So it's kind of hard actually for me to see the big picture, and I'm still following this line. By the way, there's still a lot more to do. In fact, I feel I've done very, very little. So I know other people don't necessarily see it that way, but that's my perspective. It kind of started with realizing the instrument didn't need to be tuned in any particular way. As I mentioned, it was an instrument that was designed to be mass-produced, unlike a lot of other instruments. And so it's much, much less fragile than almost every other instrument out there. I often just describe it, how funny it is to watch a band that decides to break up their gear at the end of the show, and it always takes the bass player about a half an hour on the side of the stage trying to bust a precision bass.
Got like a chainsaw with him.
Exactly. So because of that, it's really, really receptive to being tuned in different ways. I mean, it's actually kind of difficult to harm an instrument bass by tuning it in different ways. That's not true of a lot of other instruments. You could destroy the instrument pretty quickly by doing that. And what I also realized was every time I did change the tuning, something magical happened. Something that just really spoke to me in a powerful way. And so I jumped into that as much as I could and started realizing that there were so many tuning possibilities for the instrument that I was never going to be able to explore even half of them. I often tell people that one way to think about it is on my normal bass, it's easy to tune the string down a fourth and up a major second. That's a very comfortable tuning range for each string. So that means it's a possibility of 8 notes for each string. And so the number of possible tunings for a bass like that is going to be 8 times 8 times 8 times 8, which is 4,096. So that's sort of a conservative number to start with of how many tunings are possible on pretty much any bass, because that's, as I say, that's a comfortable tuning range. And so with that, very large number to start with, I just started realizing that, it was going to really be hard to explore much of that territory without being able to really access more tuning possibilities. And so I got interested in this idea of dynamic tuning, tunings moving and changing. And then I got interested in that exact process as a compositional tool, as a compositional element, as something I could use in the thematic structure of a piece.
I'm just wondering, I don't mean to interrupt, but was it the limitations of what it was that pushed you there, or was it you saying, in order to break new boundaries, I have to then go in that direction?
I'm not sure it was either. It's not. I'm not bored playing in standard tuning. In fact, most of my life I spend playing in standard tuning, and I don't practice altered tunings particularly. So it's not like I'm bored of standard tuning, but again, it's this, when I change the tuning, I don't really have good words for it other than it's something magical happens. Something really special happens.
It serves what you're thinking?
Again, it's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I feel something in my heart, and the next thing I know, it's 3 hours later, and a piece is forming, And so I'm not sure it's something I can really, I suppose I could force myself not to do it, but I would not be happy. I just find it fulfilling. I find it necessary somehow. Villalobos said, I don't know what inspiration is. I compose out of biological necessity.
Right.
So maybe that's what's happening.
So we can bucket it and call it the secret sauce, right? There's a secret sort of sauce of what's going on. A lot of us don't know what our secret sauce is, whether we're writers, painters, musicians, we don't know. But it's interesting that with that, it sounds like what you're talking about is the creative drive. And your creative drive, I personally find extremely fascinating, both because I love the instrument and two, I'm fascinated with where you take it. And so when you say things like you feel you've done very little with it, and with that, I can look at it more objectively because I'm not you, and go, well, most people can't do or think of even the way you're framing this instrument the way you are. Do you say that you feel like you've done little with it as a way to keep the creativity open and sort of unbridled, if you will?
No, really, there's just so much to do. There's just so much to do. Even if you look at something very simple, straightforward, like tunings, I probably haven't even really recorded, I've recorded probably less than 100 tunings in my entire life. And that's a very small number considering that like my hyper bass has a wider tuning range than my regular bass. And it's capable of something more like 10,000 tunings. So even just looking at something as sort of straightforward as that, there's just so much more to do with it. And, we can look at the concept of dynamic tuning and what I've done with that. Again, very, very little. I was incredibly lucky to have Joe Zahn help me develop the hyperbass that allows me to do some degree of dynamic tuning. But, we're completely limited by what we can afford to do with that. If we had $1 million budget, we could come up with an instrument that had a lot more possibilities and a lot more options for that kind of process. So, there's an enormous amount that can be done. And that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm having a blast doing what I'm doing, and I'm not sorry that I'm not doing more, but I do kind of every day wake up feeling humbled by the possibilities and thrilled to be able to take part in it.
So this creativity for you, in terms of inspiration, is inspiration for you an external source more than internal? Meaning, is it Movies, TV, reading, art, architecture? Is it more, no, it's actually like actually sitting down and understanding that there's these all these wild sort of dynamic things that can be done with this instrument. Where do you where does that sort of opening come from for you?
You're asking all the good questions.
I warned you,
Yeah.
Michael.
Yeah, I mean, all of the above.
Okay.
And, again, I'm not sure I have the best perspective on it.
But for some people, I mean, we would all like to romanticize what it might be like to sort of sit down and be a fly on the wall as you have your morning coffee and then you know take out a bass and sit in a studio and start playing. And I can imagine when you have that type of opportunity and the humbleness that you bring to the art form, which is it's profound, that some might be able, if I were you as an example, I might be able to say, wow, just the just based off the pure sort of improbabilities of what I could do with this, I'm inspired. But some might be like, no, it really does take being out there in the world and taking in all these things because the tool that you have, it is more dynamic than the tool most people have with it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Both things are important. There's a lot of stuff that comes in from the outside, and there's a lot just about the instrument itself. I don't think I would be happy giving up on either of those two sources of inspiration or general areas of inspiration. I would say that it does seem to be the case that the kind of outward inspiration I draw from tends to be, I guess it tends to be a little different from what a lot of people draw from. It's probably other music only about 20% of the time. And, it's a lot of stuff, a lot of ideas I get from literature and architecture and dance and hanging out with people I really care about and philosophy and spirituality. All these things are really important parts of the process, and in many cases, it's stuff that ends up, having a direct effect on the music, almost a tangible effect on the music. So it's not just, boy, I really enjoyed that, but it's oh, this is a really interesting idea, and I'd like to try to incorporate that somehow. I don't know if an example would be helpful, but but I'll give you one.
If you have one, I'll take it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do draw a lot of inspirations from literature, and I have my heroes. One of them, like everybody else, is Shakespeare. I just, in fact, saw that version of Merchant of Venice the other day, the movie that Al Pacino played Shylock. It's just an amazing version of the play. But one of the things that Shakespeare did in his time is at the Globe Theater, everybody would show up. It was the whole community would come to the performances, and it was his job to entertain all of them. So on the floor, he had all the lower classes, and up in the balconies, as the balconies got higher and higher, so did the social class. And so he had to find ways to entertain all of those people. And so you can, as you move through this, kind of storylines he's working with and the kind of techniques he's using, at the beginning of a line, he'll have some, bawdy joke that will appeal to the lower classes. And then at the end of the same line, there'll be some classical reference that the people in the balconies are going to really enjoy. And then you can kind of back up and look at the whole picture, and the whole thing is beautiful. And that's an idea that stays with me for everything I do. That that's something I would so like to be able to do is where you're really making an art that speaks to us on a lot of different levels. I'm not a real big fan of this kind of system where we seem to be developing in the current culture, where we have this set of music that's very academic, and then a set of music that's just popular. I'm kind of much more enamored of the idea of the past, where you kind of were trying to speak to everybody. And, that's what opera was originally. That's how Mozart wrote. He was dealing at the same time with very, very deep themes about human nature and melodies that people were really going to go away whistling, and still whistle to this day.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because if and what do we as people who aren't we read a biography of you, and we hear you came from a musical family, you studied at Berkeley. The academic component of it, was it the thing that drove you to really understand that you wanted to live an artist's life, or was it doing the academics that led you to believe I have to somewhat understand this? Like, understand how to be the mechanic, but at the same time, I want to be graceful in how I design this race car or drive it.
For me, it really is all about the passion. I mean, it's corny to say this, but it's all about the love that I feel for music and for this instrument, and that's where everything comes from. I'm absolutely passionate about music and this instrument, and I just want to know everything I can about it. And for me, it's a joy to learn about it. I want to be able to approach it intellectually. At the same time, I want to be able to approach it viscerally and emotionally. I just want to, I want as much out of it as I can. It's kind of like when you're in love with someone, you just want to have every kind of experience with them. You kind of even want to have bad experiences with somebody you really love. You even want to go through bad times with them, because there's something about that even that's appealing. And I guess that's kind of how all this comes about for me, that, my relationship with music is one of just passion and really wanting to have the full experience. And I have to say, one of the things that makes music so fascinating, in my opinion, is that it really has the ability to meet us on all these levels. Music can be extremely visceral and really, really whip us into very emotional states like nothing else can, really. And at the same time, music has the ability to communicate profound and very complex intellectual ideas. And the very best music can do both things simultaneously. And that kind of moves us into a place that, at least in my opinion, I don't even know what words to use. It's kind of transcendent, I guess, is the way I'd put it. And that's just so powerful for me. That's something I'm so passionate about that I just really want to spend a lot of time there. So I would say that's where it comes from for me.
So if you're seeing yourself as an instrumentalist, as a musician playing the bass in that way, do you feel the same way in general about how the bass is progressing in society? You talked a lot about how we are as a society now. There's a higher level of complication with it when you just look at what it takes to be a musician in this day and age. It's obviously increasingly difficult to do it. It's increasingly difficult to make money at it. There's challenges that have really happened since digital and technology have come in, as well as opportunities for sure. Do you see the instrument sort of moving at the pace of your vision of what you're doing with it personally, or is it just I'm on my this is the path less chosen?
I would say that I probably don't have the best perspective on this, but I would say that it does seem to me that the instrument's in a pretty good place. There are a lot of people playing it. They're playing it with a lot of enthusiasm. It's popular all over the world, which is kind of amazing considering how young it is. There are countries in which it's very popular, actually even more popular than here or in Europe even. And that's thrilling. It's thrilling to see an instrument just explode in growth like this. And it's thrilling to see that young people are still playing it, which kind of amazes me with all the video game and skateboarding and all kinds of other options they have to spend their time, there are people still playing it. In fact, just the other day, my 10-year-old daughter's friend decided she really wants to play the bass. It kind of shocked me. So
it's too bad you don't know someone who could like show her.
Yeah. No, I lent her a bass of mine and showed her the basics and sent her off. And her mom told me just yesterday she's decided that this is going to be it for her and she's going to take lessons. And you know, it's amazing to me. I don't really know how that happens, but I'm thrilled that it does. But as you mentioned, so I think the bass is in a pretty healthy place. But as you mentioned, I think music is in a much more tenuous place in the society. My biggest concern actually is that I have this sense that perhaps music is becoming less valuable to us as a society. And these things happen. I mean, there used to be professional poets, and I think that pretty much all relatively educated people cared about poetry and memorized poetry, and it was part of their lives. I don't think that's really happening so much anymore. I know a friend of mine the other day asked me about Shakespeare, and so I recited the sonnet 113, and she was like, "Wow, you have it memorized? Why?
You're the only human being left." Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that's not true, but she said, "Why? Why do you have it memorized?" And I said, "Well, because it's beautiful. It gives me joy to, I can just sit. If I'm just sitting someplace with nothing else to do, I can just remember that poem and how beautiful it is, and learn from it every time I think about it. So it's just something that brings me joy. And I worry that that music may be moving in kind of that same direction, that we're kind of losing sight of it as anything else other than a commodity, as
wallpaper.
Wallpaper, something that functions in the background, something we can dance to. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with any of those aspects of music. I think there's a lot that's great about all those aspects of music. But I kind of hate for us to lose sight of this notion that music really is something, again, transcendent. Every culture has always used music in their most important religious ceremonies and their most to express the most profound ideas and to move us into the deepest spiritual states. And that I fear that notion of music is becoming less common, less popular in the culture. We're kind of losing out to other aspects.
One of the things that happened with this podcast for No Treble is we brought on Robert Trujillo because he was doing the Jaco Pastorius documentary, and it's an interesting story. People who've read the bio, and anyone who loves the bass has probably read the bio. Seeing the movie come out, you really start understanding, if you have any sort of interest beyond the music, how challenging of a person he was. I mean, and not by his own doing even all the time, just the nature of his illness and how he lived his life. You spent time with him. You've been, I think, fairly open about the relationship you had with him and how it wasn't that sort of perfect thing. He's obviously coming back into our world. I mean, not that he's ever left, but I think that this movie and there's more conversations about his work is coming out. And he was an individual. He was human. I mean, we'd love to think that these people are all heroes, and they're not. They're human beings. But I am interested in your take on it, Michael, because you sort of seem unsure even of your own take on it sometimes when you talk about it.
Well, I'm really glad you're saying that, Mitch, and I appreciate it, because it's wonderful to see him appreciated. That's a really wonderful thing. And I would never want to take anything away from that. But, I hope at the same time that we can maintain the sense of how much tragedy was there. and how much loss, and how complex a story it is, really. It's always hard when we want to just have heroes, don't we? We want to just have people that we can rely on 100% of the time. But in fact, that doesn't really happen. maybe once in a while, but in general, that's not very common. And in his case, maybe more so than with most. There was a lot of ways in which he was just a wonderful human being. He was certainly very, very kind to me. But there were other parts of him that were just as dark as can be. And I worry a little bit about, especially younger people, really looking up to him without, realizing that a lot of that stuff was really really needs to be avoided. It was really not good for him, and not good for anybody. I don't know if I'm saying it very well, but hopefully that's making sense.
Well, I think there's tragedy that happens and things that are out of your control, and then there are tragedies that happen that are in your control that are significantly augmented or magnified because of the first problem, which is that the stuff that's out of your control.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And was part of it, I'm just curious because it's very rare you meet people who really worked with him and then ascended to the level you ascended to as a player and as an artist. Is part of it that you went into it almost romanticizing what it might be, and then it's like an even harder fall?
In a sense, yeah. In a sense, that's true. It was really hard. It was so hard for me to come to terms with the difference between this beautiful, intelligent, thoughtful music he was making and this insane person in front of me. I don't mean to be disparaging, but that's really what was happening. So that's a puzzle I never really unraveled entirely. Maybe it's not unravelable. Speaking of, it does sound sort of Shakespearean in a way. It's just, speaking of Shakespeare.
But you are in a genre, a genre of music. You play in so many genres of music, but it is a world that does have a lot of that. It does have a lot of, again, putting aside the mental illness, the parts that you can control, a lot of drug abuse, a lot of alcoholism, a lot of problems. Is it just the nature of how you were brought up, who you were, that you were able to avoid it? Is it that the instrument actually kept you on the path instead of off the path? Like, it is an interesting thing to me because I spent 15 years prior to this in the music publishing business, and it was particularly a tough scene because I was in the hard rock, heavy metal things where you'd see so much talent going to waste because of the things you can control, namely drugs and alcohol. And in your world, it's rife with it.
It's a tough thing. I've been around it my whole life and seen a lot of stuff. And it's never good. Maybe there are some good things about it if you really kind of stretch your imagination, but it is really tempting to get into that aspect of it, but it doesn't really help. I would love to see us. We're kind of in love with this kind of tragic figures.
Right, totally. It's endemic. It's not just bass or music. It's everywhere.
Yes, it is.
It's TMZ culture.
Yeah, I would love to see us be able to, at least at some points, I don't want to take away from anybody's entertainment, but at least at some points, I would love to see us be able to move into a little bit more complex picture of people. In the case of somebody like Jaco, be able to feel both admiration and pity at the same time, because that's the only way that I was able to come to terms with who he was. Appreciate the good parts and really feel a lot of feeling sorry for him.
But you spoke about it earlier, which I thought was so profound when you talked about your admiration for the instrument and being this thing where you want to have bad experiences with it too. It's the same thing when it comes to that level. There's the spectrum of emotions. Like we all strive for this level of happiness, and I just want to be happy, and we fail to realize that there is no happiness all the time sustainable. That's what makes the addict the addict. I mean, you have to have the spectrum.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a very deep subject you're going to now. Absolutely,
It's all your fault. It's your music.
Yeah. Well, thank you. If it is my fault, I'm proud, but I'm sure it's not. Yeah, this is a complex issue, and you're right. If once you've felt that high, it's hard to not want to go there again. It's impossible to not want to go there again. And it makes, there's a lot of things in life that are very, very hard to deal with. There's a lot of pain in life. The Buddhists have the word metta, which is usually translated as suffering, but is actually a much more complex word in Pali Sanskrit that means something along the lines of suffering and neurosis and clinging and attachment and all these things together. And they say that's kind of what life is this difficulty we find ourselves in.
So last thought from you, Michael. I've watched you on YouTube. I've watched you live. I've had a great conversation with you, and I can see the philosophy. I can see the sort of humbleness in you, and yet still you do want to sit on a stage solo, and people look at you, and that effect is cyclical. It keeps you going. It's a duality. I mean, there's a duality that you obviously, like most of us, want attention. You want people to love your music, love your playing, be intrigued. Do you think about that when you're playing? Does that come into the equation?
I could be happy not doing it, not performing. That part of it I appreciate, but it's not that important. I need to just sit and play the bass by myself. Those are probably the happiest moments of my life. Some of them are being with my family. But the performing I really appreciate, and it is very inspirational. It's very motivational when people like what you do. But I didn't actually set out to be a professional musician. I wanted to be a music teacher, but I just kept getting gigs, and people kept discouraging me from teaching because it's a difficult life. So I ended up having to accept my second career choice.
Well, two things out of that. One is I'm glad that you chose the second one, but I would also argue that you're still the teacher every day, and I think it's part of what you emote on stage. And I'm also hopeful that even though you like playing alone, that you will always play for people, because it is the way that I think you spread a ton of joy and also made this instrument something that's inspired me to want to talk about the music about it and not just the four strings and that sort of single bass line that I think most people think of. So I can't thank you enough for your time and your music and in general, the beauty you brought to the world. It's absolutely astounding.
Well, thank you so much for your very kind words and your interest and your intriguing questions. Your questions are much better than my answers. So I'm very, very thankful, and thank you for supporting this crazy quest I'm on. Because I would still do it without any support, but I wouldn't get nearly as far as when people are interested in it.